Coming up on Point of View, Doralee Brooks is the City of Asylum's Poet Laureate of Allegheny County. She is a professor, poet, and community servant. Doralee is a fellow of the Western Pennsylvania Writing Project, a nonprofit organization called Canem, which is committed to cultivating the artistic and professional growth of Black poets. This is POV. Thanks for streaming with us. I'm Michelangelo Pellis, and joining us in the studio today is Doralee Brooks. Doralee holds both a Master's of Education and Fine Arts from Pitt and Carlow Universities, respectively. In 1997, she led a community group in Homestead for girls called the Spice Writers. Her poems have appeared in several journals, and her chapbook, When I Hold You Up to the Light, won the distinguished Kathy Smith Bowers Poetry Prize in 2019. She is Professor Emerita of Developmental Studies at the Community College of Allegheny County and continues to facilitate poetry workshops at Carlow University. Thank you so much for joining us, Doralee.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. So to start off, would you please tell us a little bit about how you got into poetry?
Yeah, well, I think that I have always been a book person. So from earliest elementary school, I was into books and into writing. But the University of Pittsburgh houses an organization called the Western Pennsylvania Writing Project.
Okay.
And it's a national organization of teachers. And the idea is that all teachers should also be teachers of writing. And they have this summer institute I was invited to, along with, I think, 20 other teachers. And we were encouraged to write our own poems. And I met Toy Darricott there, who was one of the consultants, and with these other teachers who were in all different fields. It's an interdisciplinary group. So there were people in art, people in math, and so on, history. I started really, I think, taking myself seriously as a poet. Before that, I was teaching at the Monroeville campus of CCAC.
Oh, okay.
And the students there had a literary magazine, and occasionally read at Hemingway's. And I would always kind of listen in and tag along and, participate in the literary magazine. So I was always thinking about poetry, always loved poetry, but I think the real event that allowed me to become a poet was that year at Pitt with the writing project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have taken everyday things and observations and made them beautiful. So that's definitely something that's still in your poetry.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that poems, for me, I think they're kind of magic. I mean, we don't really know where they come from, but there's all of these experiences in our unconscious that are able to come out in a poem.
Yes, and we're going to talk more about that.
Okay, and that's what intrigues me most about
we're definitely going to talk more about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, what was it like establishing and leading the Spice Writers?
That was interesting, and that also came out of the Western Pennsylvania Writing Project.
That's what I was wondering.
They have a organization with teachers on the board and with committees that take up different interests. And I was on this committee with this wonderful woman and poet and teacher, and our work was involved in community writing. And these folks in Homestead were interested in having this after-school group of girls work on their writing.
Yeah.
And the girls decided to call themselves the Spice Writers.
So you did not come up with that name.
No, that was all them. And I worked with them, I think it was probably over 2 or 3 months. It was like a semester on a weekly basis after school. and helped them develop their writing, workshop their poems, and then we created an anthology. And that was really also mimicking what the teachers were doing too in the Summer Institute.
That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that sounds like quite a time. What did you learn about creative writing and the process of others through that experience workshopping with students?
Yeah, and I think, and that's the whole idea of having teachers do it, right? Because then you're taking the experience and what you've learned as a teacher, and you're learning more about that process that students are going through.
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned was to kind of trust myself and to risk. And this was a part of Toy Derricott's role with us, that she would always say, don't think, looking at your work, it's not good, you're afraid to read it. The greatest achievement is very close to the greatest failure. So you have to kind of have courage in yourself, in your own work, to present it and to trust it. So it's not something. So you can't allow yourself to be overcome by your fear.
Yeah. Which that's so funny. I feel like that's like a courage that only like students, like school age children have, because it does.
They haven't learned yet, right?
Yeah.
Right.
They haven't learned to second guess any of that.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Which is kind of brings us into something else I wanted to talk about, which is like for most writers, myself included, like actually sitting down and finding the time to write. And
that is very hard.
That's the hardest part.
Oh yeah,
of
that's
it.
very hard.
So I wanted to ask what your ritual looks like with writing.
Well, I know I'm a morning person.
Okay.
And a poet told us once in a group, Michael Harper, he said, if you have an idea or something comes to you, don't put it aside, because it's going to be gone. You have to seize it right at that moment. So he said, keep a pencil, keep a tablet by the bed. You have that dream or you have those words coming, make sure you record them, and you can go back to that later, but make sure you get started on it. And so that's one of the things that I do. I know I'm a morning person, and I know that's when I'm going to be my most productive. And so I allow myself that time in the morning. But also I know that I'm a kind of slow and lazy writer.
Okay.
And a part of it is because I read so much and I love reading, and that's where I spend my time. A lot of my poems come through that. But if I'm left to my own devices, I'll do a lot more reading than writing. So I meet with a friend once a month, and then I'm accountable. I know I have to bring some poems to share.
That time is already set aside.
Yes, and also I take workshops, because I know if I'm in a workshop with other writers, I'm going to write something. So those are the ways that I kind of know myself and keep myself writing. But sadly, I'm not a really productive writer. Yeah.
Well, it's not about productivity, but that's funny what you said, like about writing them down and coming back to them. Is I always write down the initial ideas or the things that come to me, and then I never go back. I never circle back to them. So I feel like I have all of these
Yeah, and I guess I have some of that too. And maybe what each of us needs to do is set a writing time for ourselves, and then go back to the notebook and grab something.
Yeah, I have all the prompts ready.
Yeah, go back and grab it. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I wanted to talk next about, your identity and how that finds its way into your poetry. I feel like you have such a strong identity as a Black woman, and that definitely informs your poetry. And I just want to hear about what that looks like for you.
Yeah. My experiences in Canem were groundbreaking, and I think I'm speaking for the other poets there too, that so many Black poets didn't see other Black poets and weren't reading Black writers just because of the, way the
landscape,
education, the curriculum, right. And now, all of that has changed. But when I went to Canem in 1997, I think it was just the second year that Canem existed. And it was the first time I was in a space with all these Black poets. And I have to tell you, Michelangelo, it was overwhelming for me. And I tend to be a pretty interior person and not really outgoing with others. And, it was not easy. But I think that experience with Toy Darracott first, seeing a Black woman poet and being encouraged by her, and then being with all of these other Black poets helped me to maybe to have the courage, or maybe to believe that my experiences could be a part of poems. And I think that happens to not just Black poets, but also to women, and groups who have been marginalized, that people might not think of their experience as being a theme for poetry. And I'm so glad we're past that, in our culture now. But I think that was the beginning of maybe seeing myself as a woman, as a Black person, that those experiences are experiences I can draw on in my work, that I don't have to hide in my work.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to hear you say. I wanted to hear that your identity is, strengthened by your poetry.
Yeah.
And I think it is.
Yeah, and Jan Beatty, who for a long time directed the Mad Women at Carlow University, and that is a community group for women poets in particular. And it is based on just that idea that we're talking about, that women early on didn't really have a space where they could see themselves as writers or
women
in creative
even
work.
read or write for a long time.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed to in spaces.
Right, yeah. So the director, Jan Beatty, used to say to us in groups, there's a lot of hidden stuff in that poem, right? Don't hide yourself, take some risk. And that's where the poems are strong.
I think now's a good time to stop and hear you read one of your poems.
Oh,
if that
okay.
Sounds okay.
I'd be happy to.
Would you read Marley for us?
Okay, yeah, love to. So I'm really interested in clothing, and
you said your father was an upholsterer.
That's right. My father was an upholsterer. So I think maybe that idea of working with fabrics has fed into my interest in clothing. Also, I think, growing up in the 50s and 60s and the way those decades presented different kinds of clothing, is always been in my head. But that's a part of this poem, What We Wore to Bob Marley's Last Live Concert. 1980, the Stanley Theater, Pittsburgh's turn-of-the-century palace of amusement, our Versailles, inspired marble steps, gilded mirrors, crystal chandeliers. Engler said that Marley looked bad and the band needed money. September in Pittsburgh, a cool evening, but dry and good for my asymmetrical bob. my Whitney Houston by way of Dionne Warwick look, a Jerry curl that could have rained on my shoulders had the air been heavy. I wear sheer polyester blouse, Bowie red pumps, hot as cinnamon penny candies. I expect the Whalers to wear the steel gray tees. Imagine Marley's emblazoned image, the locks twisting in lights like shields of Achilles. But blast of rainbow ribboned strobes cast Marley's M65 field jacket rosy. The I3 and galays, a yard of cotton folded crown-like on their heads, and simple gowns sway the backup notes. We jammin', jammin'. Take a roundabout route, but I didn't shoot no deputy. I3, the molding, mound, hill, dip, valley, and kiss. We country black people know the lyrics, sing along the songs, get up, stand up for Marley's last dance with us.
Wow. I love that one. When you sent that to me and I read it, I mean, but hearing you read it, like, wow, it's beautiful in the descriptions. And I mean, you just really captured that moment in that poem, that night.
Yeah. And, you know, when I first started writing poetry, I thought of poems kind of as photographs where you could, you know, like capture a moment. And now I see them as being so much larger than that, that when we read a poem or write a poem, we're really entering into a conversation. And
Yes.
what the poems we read and write are talking to other poems that are being written that we've read. Yeah.
For our next segment, A Poet's View, we're going to be creating an original poem. In Pittsburgh's heart, a tale will spin, using 7 words from the mystery bin. A Pittsburgh poem, that's the gist. Anything from Steele to Warhol can't be missed.
Wonderful.
All right. So you can go ahead and draw your 7 words.
Okay.
I'm not sure I kind of forget what's in there, so I'm going to be just as surprised as you.
Okay. And you're doing this with me, right?
Well, you're walking me through it. I'm on a journey with you.
Okay.
We're not
All right.
we're not at odds in this.
Okay. So I have my 7.
Okay. Let's see what you've got.
Okay. So Danton, Golden Triangle,
Okay.
Andy Warhol, August Wilson, Yenzer, Rachel Carson, and Primantes. All
Those are some good
right.
ones. I was really hoping you'd get the Andy Warhol one.
Ah,
I feel like
okay.
that's I feel like that's gonna bring a vibe to this poem.
Yes. So, okay, let's see.
Golden Triangle.
Looks like we have all nouns here, right? So they're all people or places. So I guess we'll have to fill in, but I would say let your heart take you where the poem needs to go.
Yes.
Because many times the poem is smarter than we are, right? So if we try to start directing things too much, that's when magic doesn't
I
happen.
think I do that a lot. I think I try to put it in a direction. I think that makes it
Yeah,
a lot
sometimes
harder.
we just have to allow things to happen.
Okay.
So I've read a lot of poems where there is a famous person in the poem who appears somewhere, right?
Yes.
So like Andy Warhol walking downtown in the Golden Triangle, or Andy Warhol late at night in Primantes. So that could be a direction.
Or like describing. I mean, I feel like going back to describing people and like, I don't know, his blonde hair flopping or something.
Good. Yeah. So, you want to have me working by myself,
Yeah,
or you're
yeah.
going to?
I'm just gonna watch you build this poem. If that's okay.
Okay. Well, I think that's
wanna
not
do it
okay.
together?
I think you should.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you should be a part
I love
of this.
that you're suggesting that because I think it'll be fun to do it together too. So, all right, do you want to? Let's start with Warhol then. I feel like that's maybe a good place to start.
Okay.
And you said, walking downtown. So I guess we can start with maybe that image. And
Okay.
I don't know what
I
time,
saw Andy. Go on.
when was Andy Warhol in Pittsburgh? What year does this place us in?
I think it has to be 60s, but Andy Warhol is eternal.
Right.
So it could be yesterday.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I saw Andy Warhol downtown at Primanti's.
And that's the occasion for the poem. Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So I saw Andy Warhol downtown at Primanti's. Was it Warhol? His wig was askew. I looked, but I didn't want to look too hard. I didn't want to be one of those Yinzer rude people. So do we have maybe a line?
Yeah, I think we have a line. I think we have I don't
Maybe
know.
we have a better verb than saw. I spied. I caught.
I like spied.
Okay.
Like,
I spied.
I think spied implies like it's something you were looking for.
I think I love that. Yes,
love
I think
that.
you're right.
Okay.
I spied Andy Warhol
For Manny's.
downtown. At Primanti's. Was it? Was it Warhol?
I like how you said I try not to look. I
Yeah.
try not to look too hard, or try not to stare.
His white wig was askew.
Love it.
The way he held the handheld flippantly.
Flippantly, I love.
Flippantly.
I think Yinzer is going to be such a hard word to work into this. But I like how you said I didn't.
I didn't want to stare. I didn't want to be.
A gawking Yinzer.
Yes.
or
Okay.
something.
And we can repeat.
Mm.
Should say, was it Warhol? Was it
Warhol?
That can kind of be
Yeah.
our like refrain.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love to repeat something like that because was it Warhol? That's what I like about poems. Like a question like that can mean so much. Like, was it Warhol? Like, does that still exist in Pittsburgh? Like, can you still see Warhol in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, and I think also it brings in a kind of music, and also it's a place for people to stop and kind of a meditation place.
Definitely.
Yeah. Was it Warhol? I didn't want to be a gawking Yinzer.
Yinzer. Okay, and then I guess, so Rachel Carson, the bridge, Rachel Carson Bridge, she's a environmentalist, I think, right? And then we have August Wilson. I mean, we could say, I don't know, I like to add like something like an everyday thing or a personal thing. I parked my car up by the August Wilson house or something.
Yeah, and I'm thinking August Wilson would have stared. August Wilson wouldn't have been afraid to be a Yinzer. August Wilson would have caught Warhol in his notebook, would have made Warhol a play.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think?
Yeah. Maybe it's like I wish I had Wilson's playwright. I wish I could put it into words like Wilson or.
Okay, so maybe I didn't want to be a gawking Yinzer, but what would Wilson do? What would August Wilson do?
Yeah, put it in a play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
But what would Wilson do? What would August Wilson do? Wilson wouldn't be afraid to stare, to capture Warhol in a notebook.
Yes.
To put him in a play.
Wow.
Warhol downtown at Primanti's. In the Golden Triangle.
Golden Triangle. That sounds so poetic.
In the Golden Triangle on the Rachel Carson
Bridge. Walking home.
Wilson's lost play. Number 11. Did you know?
Wow. I love what we came up with.
I do too.
That's a real thing, Wilson's lost play?
Oh, no.
No, you just came up with that?
That's because Wilson wrote 10 plays,
Oh.
right? So if Wilson had met Warhol,
yes.
I mean, it would be his 11th.
Where you came up with that, because that's like this is more than I was expecting you to bring today. Like Wilson's lost play, number 11. Did you know? That's great. Wow. Will you read it?
Sure. Okay. I spied Andy Warhol downtown at Primanti's. Was it Warhol? His white wig was askew, the way he held his hand held flippantly. Was it Warhol? I didn't want to be a gawking Yinzer, but what would Wilson do? What would August Wilson do? Wilson wouldn't be afraid to stare, to capture Warhol in a notebook, to put him in a play. Warhol downtown at Primanti's in the Golden Triangle on the Rachel Carson Bridge. Wilson's lost play, number 11. Did you know?
Wow. Thank you. I'm glad we were able to use. I was worried how we were going to fit them in, but I mean, that's Pittsburgh in a poem.
Yes.
Wow. Doralee, thank you so much for showing us how powerful words can be and sharing your words with us. It was really great having you here with us today, and I hope that this poem will stick with you and maybe show up somewhere.
Yeah, I think we have to both work on it.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for streaming with us. Our show is produced right here at the Center for Media Innovation with thanks from our partners at UView Television and the Point Park News Service. I'm Michelangelo Pellis, and we hope to see you next time on POV.